My name is Blake Anderson. I am a cryptographic economist. I am an information and computer scientist. My goal in life is to achieve polymathy through autodidactism or self-learning. And I think that a lot of us here are very similar to that, even if we have not taken it upon ourselves to look up what those words mean or acknowledge it. We are all self-directed learners, and we are all looking for mastery in various different subjects. So if we take polymathy and we say this is going to be Renaissance men or women and people that try to have mastery in various separate subjects, which are convoluted and complex in and of themselves, if you can have mastery of various different completely separate areas of information, it has been proven through history that you can find connections to other information. So I want to, firstly, before I begin, encourage everybody here that has self-taught themselves relating to Bitcoin to continue to teach yourself and to aim for mastery in things that you go and look at and are interested in. You have to stay hungry. You have to retain your appetite for learning. And I want everybody to take that away from this message. And I think I will revisit that at the end just to try to really hammer it home. My talk is called Bitcoin, Friction and Impact on Time Itself. The reason that I chose this topic was that I wanted to try to get into some of the reasons that Bitcoin is much more macro than people expect for it to be. Many people do not understand the nature of what was accomplished in 2008 by Satoshi's white paper, referencing only 8 sources. And what he accomplished, in my opinion, was transcending the elemental limitation of fault tolerance in computer science in such a way that I cannot possibly or conceivably extrapolate everything that it will touch. I can try, and I can do my best to quantify some things in this speech, but the actual impact that this is going to have on mankind is absolutely inexplicable. There's no way that my brain and imagination could extrapolate everything that this will affect. So when we talk about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is valuable, one of the things that we talk about is utility, the usefulness of Bitcoin to achieve various different things. And the most useful thing that Bitcoin can be said to change is reducing friction and economic activity and in markets. But what does that mean to reduce friction in economic activity and in markets? What are we doing? What is happening? What are all these words that we're using to try to explain reality as if we're all completely understanding what's going on and we're all on the same page? Well, economics are the study of human actions. We are quantifying various sources of value that we identify in human action. Human action is valuable, obviously, because we are all humans and our action does what's called engendering complexity or aiming for progress or inventing things. There's very many different names for this, but at a core level, engendering complexity is what our species is obligated to do, especially in the context of what other species on this planet are capable of and what they're doing. So other animals on this planet are not natural information scientists, which we as a species really are. We are designed to go through information and to be fascinated by it and to continually re-examine it in our heads, to such an extent that we're really the only species that can plan for the future. And this is a very, very useful thing that we can do, but it also gets us into trouble sometimes. So the fact that we can plan for the future and understand our own circumstances means that it is incumbent upon us to do these different things and to engender complexity, because this is going to be the nature of progress when we really define it down to the elemental definitions of what we can explain. Now, the reason that I'm getting so macro and far out on this is because the things that I want to talk about that are going to be more micro and tie this into data are things that I think people are most interested in when they have kind of a right brain map of where this stuff is fitting into a facility in their imagination, and then people retain information much better. So if we talk about Bitcoin, friction, and impact on time itself, I believe that the introduction that I wrote for this talk said something to the effect of, when we have constants that we hold as, obviously constant relative to human action and economics. Constants like a 72-hour bank transfer delay in this country. Waiting 72 hours to get your money somewhere in a best case scenario is absolutely devastating to our ability to engender quick, complex human action and to really go through and learn things. So if we have Bitcoin and we take the worst case scenario and say, well, Bitcoin takes 10 minutes to have my funds confirmed and then fully invoiced and documented in a decentralized anti-fragile system forever. So you have that 10-minute period of everything that the transaction needs to include versus a 72-hour base wait period for the bank wherein they are just waiting for confirmation of funds. So what do we have here? We have a bank, a brick and mortar bank that is tasked with reducing risk. Risk management is a huge part of both finance and technology. So you have a bank and you tell them, I have deposited money. You know I've deposited money. Will you absorb the risk to make my funds available? And the bank says, no. And then my question is always, what exactly is it that you'd say you do here? You're not going to absorb my risk. Why do I have my money with you? Am I getting awesome interest returns? Am I getting like huge compounded interest? Is it a lot more secure? Is there no inflation? Are you not empowering a lender of last resort to do things that are... No, I mean, like, the bank doesn't offer anything. And the collusion of banks and governments throughout the past, if any of you guys saw Patrick's presentation yesterday, which was just amazing, this collaboration between money lenders or monetary policy, however you want to call it, and the state or people that are in charge of regulating and minimizing human action to help and protect us all, this unholy, for lack of a better word, union between the bank and the state has been the direct cause of the most pernicious features of what humans are capable of in all of history. Democide refers to the act of being killed or killing by government, by the state, by collectivism kind of itself in its worst form. So when we have a system that will not allow for basically democide to come about and really viciously thin out the population because we don't have enough money to go around, and collectivism states, well, we have to take the greater good into account. So if we have to kill a few people for the greater good, well, that's just what we're going to have to do. Or we're going to have to torture this guy because he might know some stuff, and then, well, maybe we have to torture 5 or 6 people, but the greater good will be served. Maybe we have to torture an entire football stadium full of people for the greater good. I don't know. And the problem with the greater good is that it is subjective. I can say my definition of the greater good is better for the greater good than your definition of the greater good. And then we don't have productive discourse. We can't do anything. We get into talking about broken window fallacy and making untenable arguments. And that is where our state and our government is pretty much right now. They have become masters of fallacious arguments and talking about things that they know will confuse people because they've found out what are the most confusing statements and sentiments that people can make relative to, is this freedom based on individual choice, or is this freedom that I've prescribed you with and then came and liberated you with either drones or by throwing you in prison as a political prisoner for smoking pot or for doing something that I don't agree with. So when we have a government that's going through and acting under the pretense of we're going to protect you, and then they put all these people in prison for political crimes, there is a conflict of interests that is undeniable. So when you have conflicts of interest like this that you allow to continue to spiral out of control, I mean, I get that that's where we're at. So I want to illustrate kind of where we're at because I'm going to take us on a thought process that will be better and more useful if you guys are on board with me when we go. So if we are right now in a period in which the truth is obfuscated by fallacy and not many people outside of this environment are information scientists or self-directed learners, this is a system which is unsustainable. So we don't just have a financial crisis, we have a crisis of philosophy, and we have a crisis of economics, which are the study of human action. So if you have a crisis in human action, that's not good. That is a very, very big macro issue that we should all be aware of, that we have a crisis in our ability to interact with one another. And that's not good. That's really, really not good. I myself am a secular humanist, so I believe in human action almost religiously. I wouldn't want to, maybe frame it like that because, calling secularism a religion is like calling baldness a hair color. But I really do believe in the potential of mankind to solve these problems and humanity itself. Individuals can make mistakes, but the essence of what is man and empathy is something that I do believe and I have faith in. It's one of the few things that I say I have faith in. I believe in this. And so, since I believe in this, I am excited about the increased engendering of complexity through Bitcoin, to the extent that if we go through various different theories about where we're at and what's happening, you have things like time dilation, you have things like quantized space theory, classical Newtonian physics, you have Einstein's theory of relativity, and things like this. And these are all fun things to consider because they really, really allow your brain to pan out and try to figure out what's going on a basic material level and then try to build from that. So if we take that understanding of what's going on with these various different types of theory, we sometimes have people that say, well, that's just a theory, and your theory is not useful because it's just a theory. But what these people are generally missing is the entire study that's called the philosophy of science. And like when Patrick was speaking last night, he said, I got you guys because I'm going to talk about Bitcoin, but I'm going to talk about philosophy too. Well, philosophy and science are not mutually exclusive because the job of philosophy, and especially the philosophy of science, is to ask questions of science, get quantifiable metrics back, and then understand that information. And as you can imagine, without that process, getting cherry-picked data or metrics from a system that you're not asking meaningful questions from is not a very effective way to go about, well, really anything. And it's actually a dangerous way to go about things because if you cherry-pick information and you have fudged data, and then you put that out and it gets digested and nobody's asking any questions and nobody is saying, well, let's have philosophy kind of ask, first of all, where we're at, why we did the experiment, why the controls are what they are, why the protocols are testable and repeatable. And if we don't have these philosophical questions that are a part of our humanity to drive our interface with science, that can lead to bad versions of the future. And when I say a bad version of the future, I mean a future in which we use technology and the ubiquity of technology to subjugate the individual in name of even farther furtherance of the collective. So if we're gonna further the collective with this technology that we have that we all say has value. Well, this technology that we say has value, why does it have value? Because it's decentralized. And why does decentralization have value? Well, you have to look at the things that we think have value. Like gold has value because it's got various different properties. But gold is not all that scarce once people don't have an infatuation with it anymore. There is a lot of gold around. So when we think about, what really has value? What really has value is the sovereign, uncorrupted individual. All of you people, the way that you are, with your talents and inspirations and your spark and your individualism, that is value, and it is singular. There is only one. One. So that being said, we have all these public education systems that are teaching everybody the same thing, and then we all wonder, why can't anybody find out how to serve one another? Everybody knows the same thing. Everybody then has pseudo-intellectual contests about that same thing. And that same thing that I'm talking about is the idea that we can subjugate the individual. And one of the best ways to defend this idea is to build a giant, sprawling city of false information in your mind and in your explanation. So you have this giant false city of information. Kind of like what Reagan said, it's not that people are ignorant, it's just they know so much that's not true. And when you have not just a lack of information, but sprawling structures of false information, that's going to take undoing to fix it. So the best way to defend this strategy is to go all the way down in the infrastructure and the sewers and the networking of this false city that you've made and ask complex pointed questions about that infrastructure to other people. I mean, like, well, I don't study your broken, messed up city because it doesn't work. Like, see, you don't even know. You don't even know. We got down to the base micro considerations. And when I asked you about what to do about this infrastructure problem that's as a result of my entire bad worldview, you don't know. and then people turn to ad hominem and various things that make it so that we can't have productive discourse. So this really is crippling to our ability in intellectual circles to have productive discourse and to disagree. So when I talk about Bitcoin, I say Bitcoin as a genericized trademark or brand name. I don't like to say digital storage of value just because it's not relatable. It's kind of hard to understand. So I say Bitcoin instead as a genericized trademark or brand name for all digital storage of value in cryptocurrencies. For example, you have Xerox, and people didn't call copying things copying for a long time. They called it, I'm going to Xerox, whatever. You have, give me a facial tissue. People are like, what? Like, give me a Kleenex. Adhesive bandage, Band-Aid. So when I talk about digital storage of value, I use the genericized brand name of Bitcoin because it has already, got wheels. I like to do this as well because when people mention altcoins or sidechains, generally they are looking to me not for an economic perspective, but for a technical perspective. What is, SHA-256 or the hashing algorithm that Bitcoin works on versus script or other things, and people want to know information that has to do with not economic considerations, but with more technical considerations. So we have all this information that we put together, and well, what does it all mean? It means that when people ask me about altcoins, I want to be nice. I want to be supportive, and I want the entire community to work on altcoins and making this technology more ubiquitous. But when I talk about an altcoin by name, I am worried sometimes that people think that it has a killer feature set that's going to upset Bitcoin and do other things. Now, it's not impossible for a feature set to come along and upset Bitcoin. It would have to be a feature set that's really good and valuable that we can't integrate into Bitcoin for some reason because it violates the various principles laid out in the paper, and then that could come along. But what makes me concerned a little bit in the altcoin space is that a lot of people come out and they pitch their altcoin from the perspective of buy long-term, buy a lot, to the moon, it's going to pass Bitcoin. And really what's happening is a pump and dump, which sounds like it's got a negative connotation, but pump and dump is not something that I'm opposed to. And what pump and dump refers to is if you have, let's say, a giant, expensive stock or medium with a high market cap. When you dump money into that, you're not going to affect the price very much. But if you have a much smaller market and you dump a whole bunch of money into it, it drives the price up, and then you can sell it. You don't make 100% gain because there's a buyer and seller for every transaction, but you still can make a lot of money through pumping and dumping. So most altcoins are pumping and dumping into Bitcoin. That value that swells them up and they continue to go up and down as they're pumping and dumping is like, if you've seen Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, the whole I drink your milkshake overacting scene, it's perfect to describe various altcoins. And so I always try to make that clear when people ask me about altcoins. I am not opposed to innovation in the space. That's not what my MO is at all. So all that being said, coming back to friction and theory and kind of trying to wrap some of this stuff together, we have various theories about how reality works. And one of those theories, well, I guess the most popular theories understand automatically what happens when you eliminate friction. If we were to eliminate friction in this room right now, my feet would slide out and my head would slam into the ground. It would be a very violent thing. You guys would probably all fall out of your chairs too. If we reversed gravity, I don't know if my head has as far to go up, but that would be pretty bad too. But when you're talking about things like this is going to affect a situation to the extent of reversing gravity, that's a pretty profound statement to make. That's a pretty big statement to make. But when we have things that refer to greasing the skids of commerce, we need a medium of exchange because we need more grease on these skids of commerce. We need less friction. So when we don't just improve upon friction, but we make it almost non-existent from that 10-minute window to a 72-hour transaction time, that's 432 times faster at a worst-case scenario. And I was talking to somebody outside earlier saying, 10 minutes is the maximum time for the confirmation. Instantaneous is kind of what people can say about Bitcoin, but you need confirmation, so you don't want to push it too far towards instantaneous. But if you think about 432 times faster relative to transitioning value around that we create and make and share with each other, that's a big difference. If we're already approaching something called the technological singularity and we invented something that makes human action arguably 432 times more efficient, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And so we continue to go and say, well, why does Bitcoin have value? Why does this stuff all have value? And we touched on individuals a little bit before. But this stuff has value because it is decentralized, because these theories that we all kind of know about and hold in our hearts as far as taking the sovereign soul and purpose of the individual and making it so that they can live their dreams, this is valuable, and Bitcoin is proving it. So somebody had stated yesterday, they were asking Patrick, what do you think about people coming to more realistic ideas and expectations and philosophy through the reverse order that we would assume? Meaning, people come to an understanding of various different economic metric data, and they look at it and say, hey, this social experiment or whatever this is doing really well. Why is it doing really well? It's like, oh, well, this is basically the engendering of decentralization and preserving the will of the individual. That works really well. And it works so well that somebody in a position to understand mathematics and numbers and that's really left brain might actually be able to break over into their right brain understanding of the long view and humanity and other stuff like that. So it's very exciting that for the first time we have something that some people argue is bringing us closer to the technological singularity and then has all of those other things that are really, really beneficial. There are various different things that can be said about Bitcoin as the system has been made. It is a default-free currency. So saying that it's a default-free currency, it's like, what does that mean? Well, it means that the IOU and the unit of value are fused together in a decentralized ledger and they cannot be separated. Unless you go and tell somebody, I'll take an IOU for your Bitcoin, but you probably shouldn't do that. Hopefully anybody that was planning on doing that reconsiders after watching this. So we have a unit of value and an IOU that are inseparably fused together. So this makes it a default-free currency. Gold is cool, and it's a good default-free currency because nobody can go out and default on gold. But giant financial institutions can naked short the crap out of gold and make a giant paper market that's going to mess up that as well. And my biggest fear about tangible storage of value is when the pervasive debt crisis gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and they have to compete against things like Bitcoin, is that nation states, namely India and China, which have been hoarding record amounts of gold and not being truthful about it. There's various different metrics that we use to measure gold flow, and they say, we're not hoarding it, and then we measure gold flow metrics, and we're like, yes, you are. So what happens is we have gold, which is useful, but it's not. It doesn't have the same properties. You cannot transfer gold to China overnight for low. You also cannot use gold as a currency and shave dust off of it and have dust. You maybe could, but after a while, you have one atom of gold. And what happens when you try to divide one atom of gold? You break apart the compound and you transcend the definition of what you started with. So there's no 8 decimal point division with gold. So there's various different things that can be said about Bitcoin that sound like sound bites. Like, it's default free. People are like, what does that mean? Can you defend that? Can you explain it? And these are statements that are tenable and that can be defended. So when we have these generalities that can be made relative to Bitcoin and they don't betray meaning, and we can't say almost anything good about the old system, this should be like a prima facie, on its face, red flag indicator that this is going to be big. I remember somebody else asking me about how macro is or micro or what's going on. Like, let's use the Wolf of Wall Street. Jordan Belfort made a lot of money. We might not have agreed with how he did it and stuff like that, but he made a lot of money. So people were like, what is the upside potential for Bitcoin versus something like that? Well, you have over here the US dollar, and you've got financial tools and derivatives markets and corporations and everything. You have a giant pyramid with the dollar at top, and then there's an entire economy. So Jordan Belfort was at some point really, really high up, not selling toasters or cars or houses. He was selling derivatives and financial products and stuff. But with Bitcoin, we are so much more macro and zoomed out than that our potential upsides, if the Bitcoin technology and digital storage of value takes hold, and I can't see anything else happening, there are our potential upsides on these various different investments, if we hold long term and believe in it and use this currency, are unimaginably massive. I was talking to somebody outside. There is a metric wherein people have said that if Bitcoin comes to replace 10% of Forex trade, it will be well over $1 million per coin. I don't like to predict prices and stuff like that because I don't want people to invest in Bitcoin just because they think that it is a valuable stock or a commodity. Bitcoin is not a stock. Bitcoin cannot be badly managed to zero overnight. That's not even... it's not practically impossible, it's physically impossible, unless the constituencies come together and become anti-pragmatic and all work in their opposite of their interest, which, I mean, we're all at risk of potentially ending our own lives right now, but it wouldn't be very pragmatic to worry about that and be like, oh man, I might kill myself at any second. We should really take a whole bunch of risk management strategies and try to map out, how I'm going to not kill myself. So it's kind of funny, in the Bitcoin space, a lot of people talk about, stupidity or being smart, and those are qualitative descriptors. Those are not objective. But we can call anti-pragmatic behavior silly or stupid or whatever we want. We try not to use things that are inflammatory, like the word stupid, but anti-pragmatic behavior, you do not want to be going out and working in your own not interest or your disinterest. So if we have these various different theories of what's going on, we have, let's say, a newer theory. We have a theory that space is quantized. We actually have space quanta, that space actually represents a physical unit called one quanta. And if we have actual quantized space, that would naturally mean that for these theories to work out mathematically, that space would need to be 11-dimensional. You say 11-dimensional space, what does that even mean? What could that possibly look like? We're used to 3-dimensional space, maybe 4 if we count time as a dimension. But 11 dimensions, what? So if you think about what 11 dimensions would look like, you can have an x and a y axis and a z axis. You can have 3 orbs by 3, and then deep, so you have 9 different orbs. Those different orbs can move not only in positions that we know of, but they can move in positions that we can't imagine yet. Just like the people in Flatland, if you're familiar with the Flatland story, wherein everybody exists on paper in 2 dimensions and you cannot perceive people that are above Flatland and coming in and drawing new stuff, you think that line that somebody drew in Flatland is real. Because it is real. You just couldn't perceive how it came. So when we have a self-confirmed limit on our perceptions that we are all aware of, that's kind of a cool thing too. And when we have limited perceptions and we can kind of theorize that as our ability to understand reality expands, that we will be able to perceive more things. Historically, this has happened before. Our ability to perceive the electromagnetic spectrum, when we were way, way a long time ago in amoebas and stuff, we couldn't perceive a whole lot of stuff. And then eventually we evolved an eye, which is a very, very, very complex evolutionary tool. And after a while, we were able to perceive various wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, to the extent that today we can see more colors than people used to be able to see. We can perceive reality more accurately with higher resolution than we used to be able to. And that is a similar thing that is going to happen with our ability to perceive various different dimensions, which sounds hyper far out and just bizarre. But the reason that quantized space theory has gotten so much traction is because it resolves some of the most difficult problems that we know of. Redshift, dark matter, dark energy, these things become quantifiable and non-mysterious under this theory. For example, redshift. Redshift is how we measure the expansion of the universe. If everything is moving away from us, then light will have a different wavelength and it will seem to turn to red. But that is basically having science tell us something, and then we need philosophy to ask us some questions. So if science is telling me that redshift is proof that the galaxy is expanding, then the rebuttal from 11-dimensional quantized space is, well, if space quanta has any interelasticity at all, which you would expect it to have more than 0, then redshift is imminent, and that doesn't mean that the galaxy is expanding. So based on the type of philosophy that you use to ask questions of science, you can understand or undermine very, very, very massive macro considerations. And that's why it's so important, I think, that people understand that when people say, well, I just want to hear about the metrics of Bitcoin, I don't care about the philosophy, they are not separable. The reason that Bitcoin has value is because individuals have value. It's because decentralization has value. Does centralization have value? Yeah, sometimes, but it usually has risk too. We can make a zero raid, and a zero raid basically means that you're taking multiple hard drives and putting them all in one partition. You get your information, it breaks it up into a whole bunch of different pieces, and you only have to write, let's say, a quarter of the information to each drive. It's really fast. It's pretty cool. But if one of those drives fails, you're toast. So centralization can be quick and dirty, but it can also be very, very fatal. And that is in a computer science example that is as neutral as I can possibly make it. I could have tried to make other examples that aren't computer scientific, but we're already being kind of radical enough talking about different dimensions and anarchy, so I'll try to keep those considerations where they're at. So if we eliminate friction in human action and we can measure that it's 432 times faster and things like that, what we can end up doing is quantifying and measure the instantiation of the technological singularity. Over here we have the axes of our graph. Over here you have the engenderment of complexity or progress and learning that all mankind have. We have various different ways to measure that. We have Moore's law, Buckminster's knowledge doubling. So what we have is we have a linear rate of human progress. And then what happens is as we continue to make technologies that are specifically aimed at reducing friction in human action, which is materially what engenders progress, there's a possibility that we will break away from a linear increase and go to an exponential increase in the engenderment of complexity. What does that mean to go from linear to exponential in the engenderment of complexity? Well, if you look at the axes, you have time and then progress. And by the time you get to the end, and there's everything going up and down, you say, well, that's bizarre. No time is passing anymore. Things are getting a lot more complex, but is all time simultaneous after this point? And I don't know. That's a good question. That could be the case. So as we get to this giant mystery area of what happens here, we want to try to see that coming. If there was a comet coming at the Earth or something like that, we want to track that. I think that the singularity would be good. Some people don't think that it'll be good. But regardless, I think we can all agree that if we can track it, we should probably do that. So if you look at reductions in friction in human action that are 432 times faster, and breaking that progress curve away, that's great. We've transcended a lot of roadblocks. We've subverted the government. We are bringing down the lender of last resort. There's all kinds of benefits here. But the engendering of complexity is a tricky business. The engendering of complexity is a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. It shouldn't really be able to happen. The second law of thermodynamics dictates that entropy kind of has to exist in any closed system or system. And entropy refers to if you have let's say a color wheel and you're going to paint a picture, mixing all the colors to brown. Entropy just constantly wants to be like, all right, let's mix up the tide and the sea and the cesspools and whatever. Everything's going to become brown. The universe should, according to inert theories of classical physics, that should be happening everywhere. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Human beings are a walking violation of the second law of thermodynamics. We don't just resist entropy, we engender complexity. It's anti-fragility illustrated by the universe itself. We are the frontal lobes of the universe itself. So yeah, definitely. So when we have the behavior of life that is in violation of so many different things, it kind of makes us feel better that we all failed organic chemistry, or at least I did. It's a very, very, very difficult class. So life is some complex stuff. So we have to get back to the considerations of as a closed system. The second law of thermodynamics is kind of up in the air a little bit. Of all the other various laws, the second law of thermodynamics is the most hotly contested. Or that's what my understanding is. So if we look at why Bitcoin has value and we embrace all these different things that we've discovered, so we have the engenderment of complexity, we have the singularity, and all that stuff coming. What is stopping the singularity at this point as the biggest roadblock? Or the system that's like an erector set that's laying continual roadblocks, and that's the state. The state is mutually exclusive with the singularity. The state is going to have us use our complexity to subjugate the individual, which will be absolutely decimating on our ability to engender complexity. Again, with the public schooling, everybody learns the same thing. We can't exactly engender a whole bunch of complexity. All we can do is debate the semantics of what we know. So if we look at all of this as a complete system and things that are not compartmentalizable, we look at the true value of the system that Satoshi invented, and we see it as fantastic protocol, fantastic information, fantastic science, but also a polymathic type of prophetic knowledge by where he had this system interface with computers and then also with human beings and society and culture. And this system interfaced with machines and humans pretty much just as well as going one way or the other. Now, if you think about this in context of computer science, you have freeware and different incentive systems for different things to try to get software around. Compared to that meter stick or that benchmark, the incentive system for Bitcoin is inexplicably mind-shattering. To go from, I can program something that uses an information system that a computer scientist is controlled and programmed to reason with very specific, repeatable information, and then have that interface with the infinite snowflake-like complexity of individuals and to be a tool to allow that snowflake-like interaction between different people without allowing cheating and inflation funding the lender of last resort to do things that violate human action. So I think that Bitcoin is the measurable beginning of where we're breaking away from a linear increase to an exponential. And I think that in order to continue to go in that direction, the government will either have to change to something we all agree on the internet or something like that, but it cannot exist in its current state. I want to make sure that I have time to open it up for questions. I'm going to talk for just a little bit more, but I was saying outside, and I'll say it again here, I am not a believer in unilateral communication. I'm not a believer in television programming and stuff like that. So that being said, I don't want to stand up here and pontificate and tell you guys things. I want to interact with you guys. And I'm going to go back towards kind of what I said in the beginning as far as it's incumbent upon us as a community. And Andreas told me this. I hadn't accepted it before he told me it. Andreas Antonopoulos told me that not like the singularity, but in a different graph, we have an exponential increase in the rate of adoption for Bitcoin. We have a linear increase in the number of Bitcoin speakers. There are not enough of us to go to all the conferences and to tell people about this stuff. So it is incumbent upon all of you sitting here, especially, and the people watching this, to go out and to talk about Bitcoin. Especially if you're the type of person that says, I'm not going to go talk about Bitcoin because I don't know enough about it, and people are going to criticize A, B, and C. It is incumbent upon you to research those criticisms, find out if they're tenable or not, and then go speak about it. I wanted to sit at my computer. I didn't want to go out and talk to people about this. I have a phobia of public speaking. I don't like to make myself uncomfortable. I don't like to draw attention to myself. I told my best friend and my attorney that I was coming here to give a speech about undermining the lender of last resort, basically. And he's like, as your attorney, I advise you as strong as I can not to do that. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, the government is like the eye of Sauron. And when it looks at you, that's bad. I was like, your argument is too convoluted. You need to make it more simple for me. And he said, well, I'm an attorney, and I'm a pretty good one. He is. He's an absolutely fantastic attorney. He's like, but judges do what they want to do. And when they do that, there's nothing I can do except for appeal. If we get another bum judge, that's the end of your freedom. So some of the pernicious features that I talk about relative to where we're coming from and the problems, that is a big one of them. To the extent that when I was flying here, I was sitting next to this black woman, very, very, very nice black woman on the plane, and I was talking with her. And she saw my Bitcoin pin. And she told me that she worked for the federal government, that she worked for the state in HIV and AIDS research, and that that she believed in trying to get people better and cure people, which I thought was, an honorable, true believer kind of path to have. She asked me about Bitcoin. I told her about it for about 5 minutes at a very, very high level, just kind of the, fun and games version of it. And she looked at me right in my eyes for about 5 minutes, and she said, "Are you afraid for your safety?" This is a true believer. After 5 minutes, not even me being radical, me not putting on a anarcho or libertarian perspective, and after 5 minutes of explaining this technology to, I don't want to say that she's a liberal, I didn't ask her, but she works for the federal government, and after 5 minutes of explanation, she was worried about my safety. So the system that we have right now, we can try to put our head in the sand, and we can try to ignore the consequences of reality, but we are at the high watermark of government. These are the worst times in history, absolutely, and they're going to get worse. And we have an obligation upon our community to go out and speak about this. I didn't want to come and speak about this and put my family in danger. I don't want to sound like Alex Jones and be like, "I'm out there fighting with my life." I don't want to come across like that. But when this woman, the first thing that she said to me was that I'm the most paranoid person on earth. I had thought about that a lot. But when she said it to me, that was scary. And I think that we all need to be happy-go-lucky and cheerful and supporting and loving of each other, but also understand the seriousness of the task that we are all contributing to and our role in that system. I strongly implore every single person in this room to go out and speak about Bitcoin from this day forth as much as you possibly can. My cards will be up here. If you contact me and ask me about how you can improve your speaking skills, or if I can recommend you for a conference, I will do that for you. Absolutely. It is my goal and my mission to make you guys into autodidactic polymaths that can go out and destroy the bullshit of the system with real freedom and a real engenderment of complexity in human action so that we can all enjoy the future without having our kids unable to spend money that's been inflated into worthlessness as we work longer and longer and longer and more hours. Thank you guys very much. This handsome gentleman right here. Not the only thing, the biggest roadblock after we start taking off all the other stuff. What is the biggest erector set that's pooping out roadblocks to human action every 5 minutes? That's the government. That's the state. They're just like, "Oh, okay, you can't do that. You're a political prisoner for this. We're going to have selective enforcement of these laws." So when we have something that is so bad that it's like, we're going to make so many laws that you can't know if you're breaking them or not. And then when you piss us off and we don't like you, we're going to come throw your ass in a cage because selective enforcement is really convenient for us to run roughshod over our population. That's a very, very good question. I mean, is the government beyond hope? Are concepts of governance good at all? Do we need governance? And I think that the internet is an extremely good system to enable us all to develop systems of self-governance. And I think that the subjugation of the individual in the name of the greater good, which is a lot of what government is antithetical to the engendering of complexity. So it make it really hard. And one of the examples that I use to prove that is that America used to be really, really free, more or less. We had economic freedoms, and those economic freedoms that we had made us all very, very wealthy very, very quickly. And then the state gained a whole lot. It was just a small, teeny tiny old state. But when you're taking just a little bit of the main vein of the flow of human action and ideas, that state becomes the U.S. empire very quickly, which is where we're at now. So I think if we want to do another experiment in minarchism, like is what the U.S. was, and we're kind of dealing with that now, I think that we'll have just another cycle. It won't be as long of a cycle. We have more technology, so it'll collapse faster, but I think it'll bring us back to where we're at right now. I'm just going to take one from up here really quick. And then.
So you mentioned that you have an aversion to putting yourself out there and public speaking. And one of the main reasons I came here was to see lots of public speakers on talking sharing information.
And you do. I was talking to you earlier. You do.
What do you think was the single thing or the most important thing you did that sort of helped you overcome that?
Oh, man. We are not born really good at anything. People are like, that person can sing because they have talent. Look at all that talent. It takes practice to get good at things. And I practiced a lot. My son was making fun of me. I have a 3-year-old son. He kept saying, autodidactic. I teach myself. And I was like, yes, Daddy's practicing. So it takes a ton of practice. I have a musician friend. His name is Forrest. He's like the nicest person I know. He's a really, really talented musician. And people come up to him all the time like, how did you get so good? Like, so good. Like, soloing and singing at the same time. And how do you do that? And his answer is fantastic. He said, you're terrible at it for a long, long, long time, and you don't give up. You're terrible at it, just like everybody who starts at it. And the fact that you stick with it is what makes you good. There can be some element of natural talent. There can be some kind of biological advantage. But really, it is effort, motivation, how much you care, how much you're putting into it, how hungry you are that makes you good. And I can tell that you're hungry. We were talking about, information before, and I think that's what would really make you a good motivational speaker or a good Bitcoin speaker, because you can break things down in such a way that people can pick it up and understand. I'm not that good at that anymore. I have been in so many financial institutions and meetings and technical meetings and stuff like that I'm all jargoned out, and it's hard for me to not use big words that really I probably shouldn't be using. I suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, meaning that trying to learn everything that I can, now I assume falsely that everybody else has done that same stuff, and it makes it hard for me to communicate. So there's two ends to that spectrum. There's the lack of confidence because you think that everybody else knows what you know, and then there's the false confidence by not knowing enough, and the community needs to strike that right in the middle and get people that are confident and knowledgeable, and that is going to be a huge process, and again, I encourage everybody to go in that direction. You again, sir. And why do you think that is? Because the data would prove what we're worried about. No, I agree with you. It's the same. Like, if there's ever a conspiracy or a cover-up by the government or whatever, people are like, I'm going to debate this or that or this. It's like, well, was the evidence provided to us that proved that whatever happened? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, then there's some motivation that wasn't provided. And I mean, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. We're all information scientists as a species. That's like kind of what our species are and what we do. You, sir. I agree. That's where we're at. Everything is co-opted. Our environmentalist movements are co-opted. Giant oil and gas corporations are exempt from the Clean Air and Water Acts. It's like, who's polluting? What exactly would you say you do here? I mean, like, so we're going to have regulatory capture for all the little and then free pollution for all the big guys. Like, yay, free markets. So I think, yeah, it's a good point. It's The government is doing that now. They are trying to use fallacy, especially the broken window fallacy, to try to obfuscate and snow everything. So I think that, yeah, there's a risk of that going on in the future. But the way that the system works of digital storage of value is very heavy with risk management consideration. And so if the government is like, oh, I want to come in and I want to modify Bitcoin, there's basically a whole bunch of people all forging keys out of steel and going in and trying to lock, and they don't work. The government comes in and they're like, well, we want in here, we're going to change the blockchain. All these, just massive numbers of miners and people all look up, and they're not really massive people. Their numbers are multiplied by their power. So you have, copies or however you want to look at it. So the government comes in and says, I want in that door. And everybody looks up and they're like, good luck, bro, because you start making keys like everybody else. The government says, man, they're making a ton of keys, and I'm not making that many. I'm never going to get in there. And then even if the government did, what's the material damage? 51% attack. What's the material damage? What happens? Any answers?
Comment?
It forks. It's two Tron bikes. One of them peels off. Everybody's like, there goes Fedcoin. There will be, economic instability and probably, some price instability and stuff as a result of that. It won't be a completely non-damaging thing, but people are like, the block is going to fork. It's like, okay. Okie dokie. Maybe we can get a new feature set and fork again right after that, because it'll be like, but I'm not concerned about a fork or a 51% attack. There are reasons to risk manage and be considerate, like if Hash.io gets hacked and then they have a pool with 51% and then a bad actor can instantly fork the chain there or do something like that. That would be a really expensive waste of the resources that you were able to capture, but I mean, it's not physically impossible. So you want to be aware of these things. You don't want to tell the community that they're not a risk at all. But the risk happening. What are the material damages? You have to take that into consideration. Well, you can't say the block is going to fork and then we all die. Like, well, how? How does that come about? Let's follow this to its conclusion.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe how Bitcoin technologies can help facilitate transparency in government? Maybe I don't know if you're aware of stuff like that. Is there a way to help out Snowden or maybe other somewhat?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a huge possibility for that. You can include information along with transactions in the blockchain for Bitcoin and other various storage of value. So what you have then is you have a pseudo-anonymous system, which I don't like to say because pseudo-anonymous sounds like it's got a negative connotation. Like it's not really anonymous, like it's trying to be anonymous. Pseudo-anonymous refers to it can be anonymous or not as you choose to do business. So if you have non-anonymous transactions with information that's included extra, then you can actually make file systems and do things like that. So by the time you can make a file system in a distributed network, what you can build is almost limitless. And especially with technologies like Ethereum and things like that, it's really going to make it so that governance through the internet and not cheating and not lying about how much money you have will reach ubiquity, because nothing else can really happen. People will be like, do you want to invest with a company that's public and you can see where your money is, or do you want to invest with another bank? Again, for another giant segment of history.
Learn about Bitcoin for a year in isolation, not interacting with and I'm super excited to see the big picture of what I go and I talk to people who aren't really receptive, didn't care, but I'm excited about it. I'm talking about it, bang my head. Finally, talk to about this. DHL was a product.
Derek J. Freeman?
Yeah.
He's the man.
So, right. So we have this meetup. Group and put it out there. Ask questions. Just by being, so the people were coming to us, or were coming to the meetings to learn.
Yeah.
And so they were receptive to it. But also, you have to, everybody's approach, everybody's hold up.
Absolutely.
But it's also incredibly easy. So what basically the meetup group, going to the meetup group, answering people's questions.
It's training.
My skills and allow me to do what you said. Not to get into the big picture and talk about. The government and money and inflation. You don't know what money means.
Exactly.
Just last night on my cab ride over from here, I told about it. He wouldn't let me out of the cab. He literally got so this is amazing.
This guy at the restaurant the other day that we were all down, I had a similar experience last night with Xavier. Me and Xavier were talking to the proprietor, and he was fascinated.
And I ended up, like, what's my contribution? I'm not a coder. I'm a user, right? But I'm also, I've been in a small neighborhood. Wow, I know.
You're the rarest resource on earth. There's only one of you that I know of.
and I basically, I got 8 or 9 different businesses in my neighborhood.
That's fantastic.
And I go, we go to the meeting. How do we do that? These people that I already have, I exploit my personal network. Exploit sounds a little dirty, but at the coffee shop, I know I've been there for 5 years. We have a relationship. It's not that hard. People get it, especially small business.
Yep.
And I feel like it's laying the in. We need a place. We need a way to spend it. We need a place to spend it. So just do it. Just how do you do it?
Yeah.
And the more you say it, the better you get, and the easier and the more effective and efficient you are.
Well, exactly. Like I was having a debate with somebody for like 5 hours of the day about Bitcoin. He's like, "Man, you really had a lot of fast responses for my criticism." Like I've had this conversation literally 1,000 times. Absolutely. And people are like, well, how do you sell Bitcoin to other people and stuff? Like the way that you sell Bitcoin to other people or get them interested in it is you can't really sell people on things. What you have to do is you have to listen to them and see them and hear what they're telling you are their concerns and their dreams and hopes and motivations. And then you need to reiterate or re-illustrate what they've told you without straw manning, without getting it wrong. And then as you develop that relationship, which is kind of what we all need to do, we all know how to do that. That's what you also need to do in sales. You need to listen and then restate what they've said. And if you restate what they've said incorrectly, that's very, very, very hard to recover from. But if you open up with asking them about their concerns, their thoughts, and their motivations, they'll tell you. And then you have a giant foundation upon which to leverage that sale, and you can work from there. If you're with somebody who's really closed off and really, really, really introverted, there are different things that you can talk about, like how the payments are so much lower than Visa and MasterCard and stuff like that, and that some small businesses lose 50% of their profits. And if it's a bigger company that you really want to get into, you can be like, well, PCI DSS or payment card industry data security standards are cripplingly expensive for you. If you could eventually transition into digital storage of value and not pay those, your overhead would go down a lot. I think we have time for one more question. You, sir.
I would actually like to comment on the train of thought of government somehow stopping this movement of potential. I kind of immersed myself in horticulture for the past year or so, and what it strongly emphasized to me was that nowhere in nature does a centralized structure survive, and nature is to break down centralized structures. Humans by no means are removed from nature. So government in nature I accept as being inevitable to fail and break down. So I already accept it as inevitable that all these people working together in this cryptosphere will succeed, and any movement or effort to stop that is fighting an extremely uphill battle.
I believe there's a eugenicist theory that says that governments are required and will always exist because we need natural selection, and we decommissioned that by our thoughts and our motivation, our charity. So government will always come up and do things like democide and centralize farming in China so that millions and millions of people starve to death. I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes me sad, so I just don't believe it, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to debunk it because I have faith in humanity, and maybe that makes me dogmatic. But I think that's all we have time for. Thanks, everybody, so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Make sure you get to those conferences and start speaking. Contact me. My cards will be up here.